Hi everyone, Mrs. Belo here. In this video, I'm going to be going over the first few slides of the cell resp or cellular respiration notes to introduce the topic of cellular respiration. So what is cellular respiration? Well, you are doing it right now. It is the process that we do as human beings, and also other animals do this, other organisms, other eukaryotic cells do this too. And this is the process of taking in oxygen and glucose and using it to make energy for ourselves. So it's the process by which this happens in the cells in our bodies, break down organic compounds such as glucose. Remember, glucose is C6H12O6, and that's a type of carbohydrate. It's a monosaccharide. It's a building block of carbohydrates. And we use that to make energy in the form of ATP, which stands for adenosine triphosphate. Now, we do this, plants do this. The difference between us and plants is that plants are autotrophic, meaning they can make their own food. This literally means self-feeder. Versus heterotrophs like us, we have to consume our food in order to get glucose. So we have to eat something in order to get that glucose to make our energy. Versus plants, they literally might make their food right there to use right away for themselves. And this process that we're talking about, cellular respiration, that's happening in our cells is going specifically to occur in the powerhouse of the cell, which is the mitochondria. So we're talking about some big picture stuff and then some stuff on the small scale. So this is kind of the big idea, the big picture here: breathing in oxygen, eating food, and then using that to make ATP or energy for our bodies. And that is happening in the cells of our body, and specifically the mitochondria. Here's just a reminder of those two chemical reactions: cellular respiration, which we're talking about now, and photosynthesis, which we'll get to later. So label the reactants and products. So remember, in a chemical reaction, I'm just going to emphasize the arrows here. There is a left side and a right side to a chemical reaction. The left side is always going to have your reactants. So whatever is going to, react. And then on the right side, you're going to have your products, whatever gets produced at the end of that chemical reaction. Now, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are closely linked to each other because the products of photosynthesis, plants make glucose, which is sugar, carbohydrates, and they also produce oxygen, are what we need in order to do cellular respiration. And then from cellular respiration, we of course use ATP. That's the energy we use for ourselves. And then we also produce carbon dioxide and water. We exhale that carbon dioxide. The water is a byproduct or a waste product. Those are the reactants that are needed for photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, plants need water. They take in carbon dioxide and sunlight energy in order to make those things. So we kind of have this continuous cycle between us as animals, as heterotrophs, and plants. So like I said, ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. Tri meaning 3 phosphates. And again, this is the body's energy currency. It's the type of chemical energy in our bodies that we need in order to do stuff. You've already seen this in cell transport in the cells unit. Remember the sodium potassium pump, in order for that to work, it required ATP. And the sodium potassium pump is crucial in how your nervous system works. So when that once that ATP is made, and again, the only way to make the ATP is from the energy that we're getting from our food. And then once you break off that phosphate here, once you break that off, you release energy to be able to do things. Again, like in the sodium potassium pump, you saw the P being attached to that in order to make it work. And we continue this cycle between making and using ATP all the time in our bodies. So we make the ATP from the energy that we have in glucose. That's what we're going to be talking about in this unit. And then we use that ATP to do stuff in our bodies, and it turns into ADP, and then we make it back into ATP again. We just continuously do this back and forth. So kind of like what I was just saying right here. So again, ATP, we use the stored chemical energy in our food. So in order to, so this right here, that's going to be making that ATP. We get energy from our food, from glucose molecules that we eat or consume. And that's what we're going to be focusing on here. And then our bodies use that to do things in our cells, such as the sodium potassium pump is a really good example of that. That's a type of active transport that requires energy. And then we're going to just continue that process to remake that ATP again. This again is constantly happening back and forth in our bodies. Now, oftentimes when we look at ATP, we're going to look at it in terms of a type of energy, but we can also look at energy in terms of calories. Most of us are familiar with calories, right? We've seen that on the back of like a food label. Calories, this is just another way to measure energy and how much energy is in our food, because we don't have like ATP as a label on the back of a food label, although that would be kind of cool. But here's some of those conversions for that in terms of how much ATP is equal to a certain amount of calories. kcal would stand for kilocalories, okay? And you're constantly using calories in your body, even though you might just be sitting and you're like not doing anything. Like your body is still burning calories just by, functioning and doing its normal cell function stuff. And then obviously we replace those calories by consuming food. So now I'm just going to introduce a little bit of that process of cellular respiration. I know it says 2 steps here. Those are like 2 big steps. Really, how we're going to break this down is in more like 3 steps. So we're going to first talk about glycolysis. Okay. And then we are going to talk about what happens when you do and don't have oxygen present. Mostly we're going to focus on when oxygen is present, what happens. If you don't have oxygen present, we will have fermentation take place, and we'll talk about that later. But if you do have oxygen present, then you're going to continue with what we call aerobic respiration. So aerobic respiration is when there's oxygen present. And that is going to happen inside the mitochondria. So glycolysis is happening outside the mitochondria in the cytoplasm. Technically, that process is anaerobic because we're not using energy. So this is happening outside. So this is happening outside the mitochondria in the cytosol or the cytoplasm. And then if we don't have oxygen present, we're still going to have fermentate. We're going to have not like the normal steps that we see, we're going to see fermentation take place, which also happens in the cytoplasm. But if we do have oxygen present, then we're going to continue with what we call the Krebs cycle. And this happens in the matrix inside of the mitochondria. And then we will have the last part take place, which is the ETC, electron transport chain. And this happens in the membrane of the mitochondria. So glycolysis will always happen. This is always happening. It doesn't make a lot of ATP. It's the first step though. And again, if there is no oxygen present, then we will have fermentation take place. This is what we call anaerobic, and that's going to also happen outside the mitochondria in the cytoplasm. But if we do have oxygen present, then we're going to do these steps, which we'll mainly be focusing on, which will include then the Krebs cycle and the ETC. And you can also see that represented here in this diagram. So glycolysis happening on the outside of the cell in the cytosol, or we could say the cytoplasm. When no oxygen is present, fermentation will occur. That's anaerobic, meaning no oxygen present, also taking place in the cytoplasm. If we do have oxygen present, then we'll move into the mitochondria. The Krebs cycle will take place in what we call the mitochondrial matrix. We'll talk more about that in depth later. And the ETC will also happen in the mitochondria, and that involves the membrane of the mitochondria. So this is more like a big picture overview of everything we're going to talk about. And at the end of this process, we're going to have ATP. And in the beginning of this process, we're going to start with glucose. And you will see how, of course, oxygen is used and how we end with ATP, and then also how we end with byproducts or waste products that we're not going to use for anything else, which will be carbon dioxide and water. So just to show that full reaction, we're going to start with glucose C6H12O6. We're going to have one of those molecules, plus we're going to use 6 oxygen molecules. That's what we're breathing in. And again, this is one glucose molecule we're talking about. And then we're going to produce 6 carbon dioxide molecules. You just exhale that. 6 water molecules. This is what you just have as a byproduct or waste product. And you're going to have ATP, which is energy in your body. So this is the overall, again, big picture equation. And you're going to see how each of these are going to be used in these steps when we get to that later.